Susan helped Lyra navigate through the crowded streets of Nexus Station. The alien princess moved with surprising grace, despite her blindness, keeping one hand lightly on Susan's shoulder. Her touch felt like electricity, even through the fabric of Susan's jacket. Several times they had to duck into doorways or side alleys to avoid station security. "We must hurry," Susan whispered. "The merchant might report the cuffs as deactivated." "I hear many footsteps approaching from the east corridor," Lyra said, her head tilted slightly. "We should go another way." Susan hesitated but decided to trust the alien. She changed direction, leading them through a narrow maintenance tunnel that smelled of fuel and waste. Lyra wrinkled her nose but made no complaint. They emerged near the docking bays where human ships clustered together. Susan guided Lyra toward a medium-sized transport ship with the name Horizon painted on its hull. Before they could reach the ship, a voice called out Clark. "Where have you been, Susan?" Turned to see Paula Green, the ship's pilot, walking toward them. Paula's eyes widened when she noticed Lyra. "What is that?" she asked, her hand moving toward the stunner at her hip. "A refugee." Susan explained quickly, lowering her voice. "I need to get her on board without questions." Paula looked skeptical, but after a moment she nodded. "Fine, but Captain Miller won't like this," she warned. Susan led Lyra up the cargo ramp and into the ship. The familiar smell of metal oil and recycled air was comforting. After the chaos of the station, she guided Lyra to a small storage room near the engine compartment. "Stay here," she told the alien princess. "You'll be back after takeoff." Lyra reached out, finding a wall to lean against. "I can hear 6 humans on this vessel," she said. "How many know about me?" "Just one for now," Susan admitted. "And soon the captain, you'll need to tell her." Lyra nodded, but said nothing. Susan closed the door reluctantly and hurried to the bridge. The captain was reviewing departure clearances when Susan arrived. "Clark, there you are," Captain Claire Miller said without looking up. "Did you get everything on the list?" "Yes, Captain." Susan answered, trying to sound normal. "Everything except the medical supplies. They were out of antibiotics." Captain Miller nodded. Finally looking up, she studied Susan's face. "You look strange, Clark. Something happened at the market." Susan took a deep breath, knowing she could not hide the truth for long. "Captain, I need to speak with you privately." 20 minutes later, Captain Miller stood in the small storage room staring at Lyra. Her expression was unreadable. Lyra stood tall, her mercury hair catching the light, her blindfolded face turned toward the captain as if she could see her. "Let me understand this," Captain Miller said slowly. "You spent Alliance credits to purchase a sentient being. I couldn't leave her there," Susan protested. "The merchant was treating her like an animal, Captain." Miller raised a hand, silencing Susan. She turned to Lyra. "Is what Clark says true? Are you the last of the Lunary royalty?" Lyra lifted her chin. "I am Lyra of House Stellaris, 3rd Princess of the High Council. My world was destroyed by the Void Armada. I believe some of my people escaped, but I cannot be certain." "And your eyes?" Miller asked. "Destroyed in the attack," Lyra replied. "Our enemies knew that Lunary eyes hold our power. They targeted the royal family specifically. I survived because I was off-world when the attack came." Miller was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed. "Clark, you know the regulations. Harboring unknown aliens without clearance could cost us all our commissions." "I know," Captain Susan said, "but we couldn't just." The ship suddenly lurched, throwing them all off balance. The intercom crackled to life. "Captain, to the bridge, emergency." Paula Green's voice called. Captain Miller rushed out. Susan moved to follow, but Lyra caught her arm. "Station security," she said. "They are searching ships. They know I am here." "How do you?" Susan began. "I can hear their communications," Lyra explained. "My hearing extends far beyond human range. We must hide," Susan thought quickly. "Follow me," she said, guiding Lyra through the ship to the maintenance shaft beneath the cargo bay. It was a tight space used for repairs, hardly big enough for a person, but it was the only place the security might not check. Susan helped Lyra into the space, then squeezed in beside her. They were pressed together in the darkness. The ship vibrated as the engines fired up. Susan could feel Lyra's cool skin against hers, hear her quiet breathing. "I can hear them boarding," Lyra whispered. They are telling your captain they seek a stolen alien artifact. Susan held her breath as footsteps moved above them. She could hear muffled voices. Captain Miller's firm. Denials the stomping of security boots. The search seemed to last forever. Finally, the footsteps receded. The engines changed pitch, signaling departure. We are leaving the station, Lyra said. But they will follow. How do you know? Susan asked. I can feel it, Lyra replied. Simply, I know. They waited another hour before emerging from the maintenance shaft. Captain Miller was waiting for them. Her expression was grim. We have clearance to leave, but security has flagged us for a secondary inspection at the Alliance checkpoint. They claim a stolen alien artifact was tracked to our vicinity, but we made it off the station, Susan said, hopefully. Miller nodded barely. We have 6 hours before we reach the checkpoint. Then we either convince them we have nothing to hide or we all face charges for trafficking and theft. Susan looked at Lyra, who stood silently beside her. What if we don't go to the checkpoint? She suggested. What if we change course? The captain's eyes widened. Are you suggesting we go rogue? Clark? Not rogue exactly, Susan said carefully. Just a slight detour to a place where we can get Lyra proper help. My friend Heather works at the research station on Europa. She specializes in refugee placement. No questions asked. Miller ran a hand through her, short hair. Do you know what would happen to my career if we deviate from our flight plan without authorization? I do, Captain Susan said. And I know it's too much to ask. But look at her. She gestured to Lyra. This is not a specimen or an artifact. This is possibly the last royal member of an entire civilization. Captain Miller studied Lyra for a long moment. Then she sighed heavily. Your friend better be discreet, Clark, she said finally. And you owe me more than you can ever repay. The journey to Europa took 3 weeks longer than their scheduled route. They had to disable the ship's tracking system and make several random jumps to throw off any pursuit. During that time, Lyra became a part of the crew. She learned the layout of the ship by touch, and sound memorizing every corridor and room. She proved her worth by detecting problems in the engine before the sensors could pick them up. Her hearing was indeed remarkable. Susan spent most of her free time with Lyra, teaching her about human culture and learning about the Lunari. In return, Lyra's people had been advanced in ways humans could barely comprehend. They communicated not just with words, but with light patterns visible only to Lunari eyes. Their technology was integrated with their biology in ways that made human cybernetics seem primitive. The Void Armada destroyed my world because they feared us, Lyra explained one night as they sat in the observation deck, her hands pressed against the cold glass, feeling the vibrations of space. I can feel the stars, she said. They sing different songs here. Susan watched her, fascinated by the alien princess. What did the Armada fear, she asked. Our evolution. Lyra replied simply, we were becoming something they could not control, could not understand. She turned her face toward Susan. Although her eyes remained covered, Susan felt seen in a way she never had before. On my world, we believe souls recognize each other across time and space. Perhaps that is why I trusted you. That day, in the market, I knew you were different. Before Susan could respond, the ship alarm sounded. Captain Miller's voice came over the intercom. All hands to stations, patrol ship approaching, emergency protocols. Susan grabbed Lyra's hand and rushed to their designated hiding spot. This was the third patrol ship they had encountered. Each time had been more dangerous than the last. This time Susan feared they might not be so lucky. As they huddled in the hidden compartment, Lyra suddenly removed her blindfold. Susan gasped. Her eyes were like opals, shifting colors in the light, but clearly unseeing. What are you doing? Susan whispered. Trust me, Lyra said, placing her hands on the wall of the compartment. I can help. The light from the twin suns made the trading post shine like a jewel against the purple sky of Nexus Station. The air smelled of exotic spices and machine oil. Susan Clark wiped sweat from her brow as she walked through the alien market. Her combat boots kicked up dust with each step. Her mission was simple: buy supplies, and return to the human settlement. But fate had other plans. Susan adjusted her translator device and checked her supply list. The settlement needed medicine, food parts, and fuel. She had completed most of her shopping when something caught her eye. A small crowd gathered around a tent at the edge of the market. Curious, she moved closer. The tent was made of a strange, shimmering material that changed colors in the light. A tall insectoid alien stood at the entrance, clicking its mandibles at potential customers. Susan recognized the species as Krath traders, known for dealing in rare and sometimes illegal goods. The sign above the tent translated to rare specimens and special goods. Susan should have walked away. Her commander would expect her back at the ship soon. But something pulled her toward the tent. Perhaps it was the worried whispers of the crowd, or the strange blue light coming from inside. Whatever it was, Susan found herself pushing through the onlookers and stepping into the tent. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of strange chemicals. The walls were lined with cages containing bizarre creatures from across the galaxy. Small lizards with 6 legs, glowing fungi that hummed melodies, and tiny floating jellyfish that changed colors when touched. The Krath merchant noticed Susan and skittered toward her. "Human customer," the merchant clicked. "Welcome to my humble shop. I have many treasures." For brave explorer like you, Susan was about to leave when she noticed something moving in a cage at the back of the tent. It was larger than the other specimens and covered by a dark cloth. The merchant followed her gaze. "You have good eye," the merchant said. "The most valuable treasure I have." The merchant moved to the cage and with a dramatic gesture pulled away the cloth. Susan gasped. In the cage sat a humanoid female with silvery skin that seemed to glow from within. Her hair flowed like liquid mercury down her back. Her features were delicate, almost fragile. But what struck Susan most was the silken band covering the alien's eyes and the energy cuffs binding her wrists. This Lunary princess. Last of her kind, the merchant explained. Very rare, very valuable. The void. Armada destroyed her world 2 cycles ago. She cannot see, but her other senses are remarkable. The alien woman turned her head at the sound of their voices. Despite the blindfold, Susan felt as if the creature was looking right at her. The merchant named a price that made Susan wince. It was nearly all the credit she carried. "Why is she bound?" asked Susan, trying to keep her voice neutral. The merchant waved a clawed appendage. "She tried to escape 3 times. Very clever for a blind one." Susan felt her stomach tighten. The Human Alliance had strict rules about sentient trafficking, but many species fell through the cracks, especially those without formal representation in the Galactic Council. The Lunary had been a secretive species even before their world was destroyed. If this woman truly was the last of her kind, "Take your time," merchant said. "The princess cost much, but worth every credit. Perhaps demonstration." Before Susan could object, the merchant reached into the cage and pinched the alien woman's arm. The silver-skinned woman didn't cry out, but Susan saw her jaw tighten. "Stop," Susan said more sharply than intended. The merchant tilted its head, curious at her reaction. Susan tried to appear casual, though her heart was racing. She needed to think. The right thing would be to report this to station security, but Nexus Station was notorious for its corruption. By the time authorities arrived, the merchant would be gone, and the alien woman with him. Susan reached for her credit chip. The choice was clear. She would buy the alien princess, then contact Alliance Command for guidance. They would know what to do with a refugee from a destroyed world. "I will take her," said Susan. The merchant clicked, its mandibles in what Susan assumed was delight. After completing the transaction, the merchant handed Susan a small device control for energy cuffs. Merchant explained, and special food pellets for Lunary digestion. 3 days' worth. Then she can
eat human food. No direct sunlight bad for Lunary skin. Susan nodded, trying to appear like a casual buyer of sentient beings rather than someone planning an immediate release. The merchant opened the cage, and the silver woman stepped out with surprising
grace. Despite her blindness, Susan noticed she was tall, almost as tall as herself. The alien moved her head slightly as if listening to something Susan couldn't hear. The merchant pushed the alien toward Susan, who gently took her arm. The woman stiffened at her touch but didn't pull away. Susan led her from the tent, feeling the stares of the other market-goers. Some looked disgusted, others envious. None made a move to stop her. Only when they were several blocks away in a quiet alley did Susan stop. She looked around to make sure they were alone, then reached for the energy cuffs. "My name is Susan Clark. I am a human," she said, speaking slowly. "I bought you to set you free." The alien princess stood perfectly still as Susan deactivated the cuffs. They fell to the ground with a clatter. Susan expected gratitude, perhaps even tears. Instead, the alien woman moved with lightning speed, her hand shot out, grabbing Susan's throat. Her touch was cool like metal. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't kill you." "Human," the alien princess whispered, her voice musical despite the threat. Susan didn't struggle. "I just freed you," she managed to say. The grip loosened slightly, but didn't release. "You purchased me like property." The silver woman countered. "Your kind are no better than the others." Susan took a careful breath. "I bought you because it was the only way to get you out. I hate trafficking. I want to help you." The alien tilted her head, her covered eyes somehow still managing to look skeptical. She placed her free hand over Susan's heart. Susan's skin tingled at the contact. "You speak truth, human." "Susan, your heartbeat is steady. Your skin warm like your sun." The grip on Susan's throat released entirely. "My name is Lyra of House Stellaris," whispered the alien. "Princess, I am the last royal of my world, the Void. Armada destroyed everything. My people are scattered, if any survive at all." Her voice trembled slightly at the last words. Susan rubbed her throat. Then she noticed Lyra swaying slightly on her feet. "How long since you've eaten properly?" she asked. Lyra straightened her posture. 3 of your Earth days." Susan pulled out a ration bar from her pocket. "Here it's not great, but it's human food." She placed it in Lyra's hand. Lyra sniffed the bar cautiously. Before taking a small bite, her silver features registered surprise. "It is sweet," she said, taking another bite. Susan smiled for the first time. "It's all I have for now. We need to get you somewhere safe. Can you walk a little farther?" "My ship is docked in the lower quarter." Susan watched in amazement as Lyra's hands began to glow faintly against the ship's metal wall. The color spread like ripples in water, moving outward from her fingertips. "What are you doing?" Susan whispered. "Masking our energy signature," Lyra replied, her voice strained. "It is an ability all Lunary royals possess, though it is difficult without my sight." The ship's engines suddenly went quiet. Susan held her breath, listening to the distant sound of the patrol ship's scanners sweeping over them. Minutes passed in tense silence. Finally, the engines hummed back to life. Captain Miller's voice came over the intercom. "All clear." They moved on. "Everyone back to stations." Susan let out a relieved breath. "That was too close," she said. Lyra slumped against her clearly, exhausted from whatever she had done. Susan helped her replace the blindfold, then guided her back to the main deck. The crew looked at them with new respect. Captain Miller nodded to Lyra. "Your princess just saved our skins." "Clark," she said. "We owe her." The rest of the journey passed without incident. 3 days later, they arrived at Europa Station. The massive research facility orbited Jupiter's icy moon like a silver spider. Europa Station was technically under Alliance jurisdiction, but it operated with significant autonomy due to its scientific importance. Captain Miller docked at a private bay, away from the main traffic. Susan contacted her friend Heather. Immediately, Heather Wong was a xenobiologist who specialized in refugee placement. She had helped many displaced aliens find new homes or safe passage to their remaining colonies. When she saw Lyra, she gasped, "A living Lunary." She whispered, her eyes wide. "I thought they were all gone. I am the last of my royal line," Lyra said with dignity. "There may be others in hiding, but our homeworld is destroyed." Heather nodded soberly. "I can help you," she said, "but it will take time. The Alliance has placed restrictions on lunary movement since the conflict. They fear Void, Armada reprisals. Susan looked at Captain Miller, who had accompanied them to Heather's lab. How much time, she asked. Miller shrugged. A week, maybe less. The Horizon needs to report to Earth soon, or questions will be asked, Heather typed rapidly on her tablet. I can arrange temporary quarters here, she said. But long-term we need a better solution. She looked at Susan. You should continue to Earth with your ship while I work on placement for Lyra. Susan felt a sudden panic at the thought of leaving Lyra behind. No, she said firmly. Where she goes, I go. Captain Miller raised an eyebrow. Clark, you have duties, responsibilities. Your family is on Earth. Susan knew the captain was right. Her contract with the Alliance Shipping Authority had another year. Her parents expected her home for the holidays. But the thought of abandoning Lyra to an uncertain fate was unbearable. She had risked everything to save the alien princess. She couldn't walk away now. I request a leave of absence, Captain, she said formally. For personal reasons. Miller studied her for a long moment. Then she sighed. Again, you ask the impossible, Clark. But after what we've been through, she shook her head. 1 month. Then I expect you back on duty. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Heather arranged quarters for Susan and Lyra in the station's diplomatic section. They were small but private with basic amenities. Susan helped Lyra adjust to the new environment. The gravity was different, the air drier, the sounds unfamiliar. But Lyra adapted quickly, as she always did. Heather visited daily running tests with Lyra's permission and making contacts throughout the system seeking a safe haven. She brought news of the outside world, including troubling rumors. The Void Armada has been spotted near Saturn, she told them one evening. They claim to be on a diplomatic mission, but many fear they seek something else. Lyra, who had been sitting quietly by the window, turned her head. They seek me, she said simply. They know I survived. They will not stop until all Lunari are extinct. Susan felt a chill at Lyra's words. Why, she asked. What makes your people so dangerous to them? Lyra was silent for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was low. My people were evolving, becoming something new. Our scientists discovered a way to manipulate reality itself through quantum entanglement using only our minds. The Void Armada fears this power. They believe it threatens the natural order. Heather looked skeptical. But you lost your eyes. How could you? I was still in training when the attack came. Lyra explained. My abilities are limited, but even blind I can sense things beyond normal perception. She stood, moving gracefully to where Susan sat. She placed a cool hand on Susan's face. I can see you in ways eyes never could. Your energy, your essence, the core of who you are. Susan felt herself blush. Heather cleared her throat. Breaking the moment, I have news, she said. Your refugee application has been processed. Lyra, there is a colony on Titan that has agreed to take you in. They have a small community of displaced persons from various worlds. The Alliance has no direct authority there. Susan felt relief flood through her. When can we leave? She asked. Heather hesitated. There is a transport leaving tomorrow, but Susan, there is a complication. The colony has agreed to accept Lyra, not you. They have limited resources. They cannot take human refugees without special dispensation. Susan stared at her friend. But I can't just leave her. Lyra reached for Susan's hand, finding it. Unerringly, I knew this moment would come, she said softly. You have your world. I must find my place in what remains of mine. No, Susan said firmly. There must be another way. Heather looked uncomfortable. There is, she admitted. The mining colonies on Mars are always looking for workers. The conditions are harsh, but they ask few questions. If you went there, you would be only 3 days' travel from Titan. You could visit. Susan considered this. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than returning to Earth and never seeing Lyra again. She had enough saved to buy passage to Mars and the skills to secure employment. She looked at Lyra. whose face remained impassive. "What do you think?" she asked the alien princess. Lyra tilted her head as if listening to something beyond human hearing. 3 days is not so far," she said finally. "Not for souls that recognize each other." The next morning, they prepared to leave Europa Station. Their few possessions packed in small bags. Susan had sent a message to her parents explaining her decision as best she could without revealing Lyra's existence. Heather had arranged false identification for Lyra, identifying her as a refugee from the outer colonies with proper documentation as they waited in the departure lounge for their separate transports. Susan felt a growing unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Lyra, too, seemed restless, her head turning frequently as if tracking invisible movements. "Something troubles you," Lyra said quietly. Susan hesitated. "Just nervous, I guess." Lyra shook her head. "No, there is more. Your heartbeat is erratic. Your breathing shallow. You sense it too." Before Susan could ask what she meant, the station alarms blared. Emergency lockdown. All personnel to secure locations. "This is not a drill," repeat. "This is not a drill," Heather, who had come to see them off, paled. "We need to move now," she said. "What is happening?" Susan demanded as they hurried from the lounge. Heather pulled up her security clearance on her tablet, checking. "The emergency channels void Armada ship approaching," she said. "They are demanding to board, claiming to search for fugitives." "They found me," Lyra whispered. Her normally composed face showed fear for the first time. Heather led them through service corridors. "Away from the main halls, I know a place," she said. "A research shuttle in Bay 12. It's prepped for an expedition to Europa's surface. We can use it to escape." As they ran, Susan noticed station security personnel moving in formation, checking identification, and searching compartments. They were being systematic, working their way through the station section by section. It would only be a matter of time before they were discovered. Heather swiped her access card at a maintenance door, pushing them through, into a narrow passage. "This leads directly to the bay," she explained. "No security checkpoints." They hurried through the dimly lit corridor, their footsteps echoing on the metal floor. Susan kept a protective hand on Lyra's arm, guiding her around obstacles. Lyra moved confidently despite her blindness, sensing the space around her with uncanny accuracy. They were halfway to the bay when Lyra suddenly stopped. "They are ahead," she said, voices low with urgency. Heather froze. "How can you?" Susan trusted Lyra's senses without question. "Is there another way?" she asked. Heather hesitated, then nodded. "Follow me." Heather led them through a maintenance hatch into the station's water recycling system. The air was humid and smelled of chemicals. Susan helped Lyra navigate the narrow walkways between large filtration tanks. The constant hum of machinery would hide any sounds they made. "This system runs throughout the entire station," Heather explained. "We can bypass the main corridors and reach the shuttle bay from below." They moved carefully through the labyrinth of pipes and tanks. Susan noticed Lyra becoming increasingly tense. Her silver skin seemed to pulse with faint light. "What is it?" Susan whispered. "Void soldiers," Lyra replied. "They wear thought dampeners, but I can still sense their presence. They are spreading through the station like a virus." "How many?" Heather asked, her voice barely audible. Lyra tilted her head. "Many, perhaps 50. They seek something specific, you." Susan said, "They must have tracked us from Nexus Station." Lyra shook her head. "Not just me. They seek information." She reached out, touching a nearby pipe as if reading something through the metal. "They believe humans have been studying lunary technology." Heather looked away guiltily. Susan noticed immediately. "What is it?" she demanded. Heather sighed. "After the destruction of Lunaire, the Alliance collected artifacts, any technology that survived. They brought some of it here for research." Lyra's face hardened. "You stole from my dead world," she accused. "It wasn't like that," Heather protested. "We were trying to understand, to preserve what was lost." The debate was cut short by the sound of heavy boots on metal grating above them. Everyone froze. A beam of light swept through the grates, illuminating the water below. They pressed themselves against a large tank, holding their breath. The footsteps continued, then faded. "We need to keep moving," Heather whispered. "They will search here eventually." They continued their journey through the water system, occasionally hearing security teams above and around them. After what seemed like hours, they reached an access point near Shuttle Bay 12. Heather checked her tablet. "The emergency lockdown is still in effect," she said. "But my clearance should override it for the research vessels." She swiped her card at the access panel. The light remained. "Red no," she muttered, trying again. Nothing happened. They must have suspended all clearances. Susan looked around desperately for another way out. The shuttle bay was visible through a small window in the access door. Security personnel stood guard at the main entrance. Their black uniforms marked with the Europa Station insignia were different from the others she'd seen. They moved with military precision. "Those aren't station security," Susan realized. "Those are Alliance Special Forces." Heather nodded, grimly. "The situation is worse than I thought. If Special Forces are involved, this goes beyond a simple search." Lyra, who had been silent, placed her hand against the door. Her silver skin began to glow faintly. The security panel flickered, then turned green. The door slid open an inch, then stopped. "I cannot maintain it for long," Lyra said, her voice strained. "Hurry." Susan pushed the door open enough for them to slip through. They emerged behind a stack of cargo containers out of sight of the guards. Heather pointed to a small shuttle at the far end of the bay. "That's our ride," she whispered. "The Europa Explorer Research Vessel Class 4. It has supplies for a 2-week expedition to the surface." "How do we get to it without being seen?" Susan asked. The bay was well lit, with at least 6 guards patrolling the open space. Lyra removed her blindfold, revealing her opalescent, sightless eyes. "I can create a diversion," she said, "but it will reveal my presence to the Void Armada. They will know a Lunari is here." "Are you sure?" Susan asked, concerned. Lyra nodded. "I have hidden long enough." She placed her hands on the metal floor. Her silver skin began to glow, brighter pulses of light, moving from her fingers across the surface like ripples in a pond. The lights in the bay flickered, then went out. Alarms blared as emergency systems activated. The guards shouted in confusion, moving toward the main control panel. "Now," Heather urged. They ran across the darkened bay toward the shuttle, Susan guiding Lyra. By the hand, Heather reached the shuttle first, activating the entry ramp. As it lowered, a spotlight suddenly illuminated them. "Halt," a voice commanded. 3 figures in the distinctive black armor of the Void Armada stepped from behind a fuel tank. Their helmets concealed their features, but their weapons were pointed directly at the group. Susan pushed Lyra behind her, protective, even in the face of certain capture. The lead soldier stepped forward. "Lunari Royal, by order of the Armada Council, you are detained. Your human accomplices will be processed according to protocol." Before Susan could respond, Lyra stepped forward, her blind eyes somehow finding the soldier. She stood tall, her silver hair floating around her as if in water, her skin glowing with inner light. "I am Lyra of House Stellaris," she declared, her voice echoing strangely in the bay. "You destroyed my world, murdered my family, but you failed in your mission. The Lunari survive. We evolve. We remember." The soldiers raised their weapons. "Take her," the leader ordered. Lyra raised her hands. A pulse of energy exploded outward, knocking the soldiers back. The bay doors behind them suddenly opened, exposing the loading area to the vacuum of space. Emergency force fields activated, containing the breach, but the sudden decompression sent equipment and supplies flying. The soldiers scrambled for handholds. "Run," Lyra shouted. They raced up the shuttle ramp. Heather jumped into the pilot seat, activating the engines. Susan pulled Lyra inside, hitting the control to close the ramp. The shuttle vibrated as the engines fired. "Warning, emergency lockdown in effect, automatic systems disabled," a computerized voice announced. "Shuttle launch requires manual override." Heather typed frantically on the control panel. "My codes aren't working," she said, panic in her voice. We can't take off. Susan looked out the viewport. Guards were regrouping heading toward the shuttle. Void Armada soldiers had recovered from Lyra's attack and were approaching from another direction. They had seconds at most. Lyra moved to the control panel, placing her hands on the surface. "Give me control of the ship," she said. Heather hesitated, then moved aside. Lyra spread her fingers over the controls. Her skin glowed brighter, lines of silver light spreading from her hands into the ship systems. The control panels flickered, then came to life. Manual override. Accepted the computer. Announced launch sequence initiated. The shuttle lifted off the bay floor. Heather took the controls, guiding it toward the open bay doors. The force field shimmered as they approached. "Will we be able to pass through?" Susan asked. Heather nodded. "The field is designed to hold atmosphere but allow solid objects through." As they approached, the field weapons fire erupted from below. Energy bolts struck the shuttle's hull. Damage alarms blared. Heather cursed, pushing the engines harder. The shuttle shuddered, then broke through the force field into open space. Pursuit ships launching. The computer warned Heather set course away from the station, pushing the small research vessel to its limits. "We can't outrun military vessels," she said, "but we can try to reach the asteroid belt. Hide until they give up." Susan checked the damage reports. Hull breach. In cargo section, she read, "Ceiling now, life support at 80%, engines overheating." Lyra sat quietly, her hands still connected to the control panel. Susan noticed she looked pale. Her silver skin dulled. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Maintaining connection." Lyra replied, her voice weak. "I am helping the engines. They were not designed for this." A proximity alarm sounded. 2 Void. Armada fighters approaching from Sector 4, the computer announced. Heather changed course, heading toward Europa's icy surface. "Maybe we can lose them in the atmospheric interference," she said. The shuttle dove toward the moon. The fighters followed, closing rapidly. Susan watched the distance markers with growing dread. They would not escape, not in this vessel. Lyra suddenly stood, her connection to the control panel breaking. "What are you doing?" Susan asked. "There is no other way," Lyra said. She moved to the airlock. Lyra. "No." Susan grabbed her arm. The alien princess turned her blind eyes toward Susan. For the first time, Susan saw tears like liquid silver running down her cheeks. "My people had a saying," Lyra said softly. "When the path ends, make a new one." She placed her hand on Susan's face. "I see you, Susan Clark," she whispered. "With more than eyes. I see your soul. It shines." Before Susan could respond, Lyra pushed her away with surprising strength. She hit the airlock controls, stepping inside. The inner door closed. "Emergency airlock activation," the computer announced. "Outer door opening." "No," Susan screamed, pounding on the airlock door. Through the small window, she saw Lyra floating in space. Her silver skin began to glow brighter and brighter, her hair streaming around her like a mercury halo. The pursuing fighters approached. The light from Lyra's body intensified, becoming blinding. Susan shielded her eyes. When she looked again, the fighters were gone. Debris scattered where they had been, and Lyra was gone. Heather stabilized the shuttle, her face pale with shock. "She was Lunary," she said in awe. "They can convert their physical form to energy in moments of extreme need. It is said the royal line could direct that energy. But I never believed." Susan stared at the empty space where Lyra had been. A crushing sense of loss overwhelmed her. She had failed to protect the alien princess. She had lost someone who had become more than a refugee, more than a friend. Warning station, defenses targeting shuttle, the computer announced. Heather cursed. "We have seconds to make a decision," she said. "Europa or deep space." Susan turned away from the airlock. "Neither," she said, her voice hollow. "Take us to Mars." Heather looked surprised. "Mars? But why?" The journey to Mars took 11 days. The damaged shuttle limped through space, conserving power and making frequent stops to cool overheating systems. Susan spent most of her time in the cockpit, staring at the stars, clutching Lyra's blindfold. She slept little, ate less. Her mind constantly replayed the moment Lyra disappeared in that blinding flash of light. Heather worried about her friend, but focused on keeping them alive. The shuttle had not been designed for long-distance travel. They were running low on supplies and the life support system was failing. Susan barely noticed. These physical concerns seemed trivial compared to the loss she felt. On the 10th day, Heather called her to the cockpit. "Mars is visible," she said, pointing to a reddish dot in the distance. "We'll reach orbit tomorrow." Susan nodded without enthusiasm. She had begun to doubt her mission. What if there was no sanctuary? What if Lyra had truly sacrificed herself? What if this journey was nothing more than a fool's errand born of grief and denial? That night, as Susan dozed fitfully in her chair, she dreamed Lyra stood before her, silver skin, glowing softly, blind eyes somehow looking directly at her. "Follow the light," whispered Dream Lyra. "The northern cave, where frost meets fire. I wait for you." Susan woke with a start. The blindfold in her hand felt warm, almost vibrating with energy. She rushed to the cockpit where Heather monitored their approach to Mars. "We need to land near the northern pole," she said urgently. Heather looked at her in surprise. "The northern region is mostly uninhabited. The mining colonies are near the equator." Susan shook her head. "The sanctuary is in the north," she insisted, "where frost meets fire." Heather frowned. "That sounds like Olympus Mons North," she said. "The volcano has ice caves in its northern slope from the old terraforming days, but Susan, there's nothing there. The area is restricted due to instability. That's where we need to go," Susan said with certainty. "I know it." Heather sighed, but adjusted their course. The shuttle entered Mars' atmosphere the next morning. The red planet filled their viewports, its cratered surface scarred by massive canyons and dominated by the towering peak of Olympus Mons, the largest volcano in the solar system. Heather guided the shuttle toward the northern slope of the mountain. Proximity alarms suddenly blared. 2 vessels approaching the computer warned mining security patrol. Heather swore under her breath. "I forgot the northern quadrant is monitored for illegal mining," she said. "They'll detain us for unauthorized entry." Susan took the controls. "Let me fly," she said. "We need to get lower. Use the canyons for cover." Heather reluctantly moved aside. Susan dropped the shuttle into a steep dive heading toward a massive canyon that cut through the northern plains. The security vessels followed, firing warning shots. The damaged shuttle shuddered under Susan's control, but responded to her commands. She weaved through the canyon using rock formations as cover. The security ships are breaking off pursuit. The computer announced Reason Canyon instability danger level high. Susan continued deeper into the canyon. The walls rose around them. Red rock streaked with black and white minerals. The shuttle sensors indicated increasing magnetic interference. "We're getting close to something," Heather said, checking the readings. "These energy patterns are unlike anything I've seen." Natural formation? Or Susan felt the blindfold grow warmer in her pocket. She pulled it out, surprised, to see it glowing faintly with silvery light. She placed it on the control panel. The glow intensified, pointing toward a dark opening in the canyon wall. "There," she said. "That cave." Heather looked doubtful. "But there's nowhere to land. The opening is barely large enough for the shuttle." Susan was already adjusting their course. "Trust me," she said. The shuttle approached the cave entrance, which indeed seemed too small for their vessel. Just as collision appeared inevitable, the rock face shimmered like a mirage. The shuttle passed through what had appeared to be solid stone, emerging into a massive cavern. Heather gasped. The sensors, they didn't show this. The cavern stretched for kilometers, its ceiling lost in darkness. The walls glowed with embedded crystals, providing soft blue illumination. A smooth landing platform extended before them. Susan set the shuttle down gently. The engines whined, then fell silent. "Warning, life support critical," the computer announced. "Estimated failure in 20 minutes. Heather checked the environmental readings. "The air outside, it's breathable," she said in surprise. "Slightly higher oxygen than Earth, normal temperature moderate." Susan was already moving toward the airlock, Lyra's blindfold clutched in her hand. She hit the control panel. The door opened, revealing a metal walkway that extended from the landing platform into the cavern. Susan stepped out, Heather following cautiously behind. The air smelled of minerals and something else, something sweet and unfamiliar. The crystals in the walls pulsed with light as they walked, creating a path deeper into the cave. They followed in silence, both overwhelmed by the impossible space. After walking for several minutes, they reached an archway carved with symbols Susan recognized. From Lyra's descriptions of her homeworld, beyond the arch lay a vast chamber filled with structures that seemed grown rather than built. Flowing organic shapes, created buildings, bridges, gardens, all illuminated by the same crystal light and moving. Among these structures were people. Silver-skinned people. Lunary Susan froze, unable to believe her eyes. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of the alien beings moved through the hidden city. Their mercury hair caught the light, their graceful movements like dancers. Some wore blindfolds like Lyra had. Others showed opalescent eyes that shifted colors in the light. A group of Lunary noticed the humans and approached. Susan held her breath as they drew near. Their expressions were cautious but not hostile. One stepped forward, an elderly male, his silver skin etched with fine lines. "Why have you come to Sanctuary, humans?" he asked, his voice musical like Lyra's. Susan held out the blindfold. It glowed brighter in her hand. "I seek Lyra of House Stellaris," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you know her?" The Lunary exchanged glances. The one who spoke took the blindfold, examining it with reverent care. "This belongs to the lost princess," he said. "Where did you find it?" "I didn't find it," Susan explained. "Lyra gave it to me. I helped her escape from Nexus Station. She sacrificed herself to save us from Void. Armada fighters." The elder Lunary closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they glowed with inner light. "You speak truth," he said. He gestured for them to follow. They were led through the hidden city. Other Lunary stopped to watch them pass, some curious, some fearful. Susan noticed that many showed signs of injury, some missing limbs, others bearing scars across their silver skin. Survivors of the genocide scattered across the galaxy now gathered in this secret place. The elder brought them to a central structure, a perfect dome that seemed to be made of solidified mercury. It pulsed with light, responding to their approach. The elder turned to Susan only. "You may enter," he said. "Your companion must wait." Heather nodded to Susan. "It is all right," she said. "I will wait here." Susan approached the dome alone. As she neared it, the surface rippled like liquid metal, creating an opening. She stepped. Through inside the dome was a single circular room. At its center, a pool of what appeared to be liquid silver bubbled gently. The walls were lined with crystals larger than those in the cavern. They hummed with energy, filling the room with soft sound. Susan approached the pool, uncertain. What was she supposed to do? The silver liquid moved as if alive, rippling in response to her presence. She knelt beside it, staring into its depths. "Show me Lyra," she whispered. "Please." The pool stilled its surface, becoming mirror smooth. Then it began to glow. The light built until Susan had to shield her eyes. When she looked again, a figure was forming, rising from the pool. Silver skin taking shape. Mercury hair flowing in an unfelt breeze. Lyra, she stood before Susan, as beautiful as ever, her blind eyes uncovered, glowing with opalescent light. She smiled. "You found me. Susan Clark," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "Just as I knew you would." Susan reached for her, but her hand passed through Lyra's form. "Are you really here?" she asked. "Or is this some kind of recording?" "Neither and both," Lyra replied. "I exist now in energy form. My physical body was lost in the transformation, but my essence remains. Here in this sacred pool, all Lunary energy returns. Our memories, our souls awaiting rebirth." Tears filled Susan's eyes. "Can you come back?" she asked. Lyra moved closer, her form solidifying slightly. "Not as I was," she said. "But perhaps," she gestured to the pool. "In time, a new body can be grown from the energy matrix, but it requires sacrifice. A binding, a merging of energies. What kind of sacrifice? Susan asked. A willing partner, Lyra explained. The joining of two energy patterns creates stability, allows reformation. But the partner must be willing to share life force. It is not without risk. Susan understood immediately. I will do it, she said without hesitation. Whatever it takes. Lyra smiled. You do not even know what you offer. I know enough, Susan replied. I know that since I found you in that market, nothing has been the same. I know that losing you felt like losing part of myself, and I know that I would rather risk everything than walk away. Lyra extended her hand. It hovered just above Susan's skin. If we do this, you will change, she warned. The process will alter your DNA, your lifespan, your very nature. You will be neither fully human nor fully lunary. But something new. Susan thought of Earth, of her family, of the life she had planned. It seemed distant now, unimportant compared to the being before her. I choose this, she said firmly. I choose you, Lyra nodded. Then enter the pool.